there was a tangible, sustainable benefit. I could actually validate and prove out that impact that I was having on a day-to-day basis.
Welcome to the Food Grads Podcast, the podcast that takes you on a fascinating journey into the hearts and minds of the amazing people who work in the food, beverage, and agricultural industries. My name is Veronica, and I am a PhD candidate studying fat-based food emulsions. On this podcast, we share insights from professionals at all stages of their careers, find out what they do, why they do it, and how they are changing the industry one day at a time. So no matter what your passion is, there's always something for everyone in food, and we'll help you find it. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Food Grads Podcast. In today's episode, we are covering the importance of energy consumption in the food sector, unique career paths for engineering graduates, and working as part of a team. But we'll also go deeper on how to attend trade shows as a student. Our guest today is Tanner Behrend, Manager of Funding and Expansion at Edgecom Energy. Edgecom Energy provides energy solutions for businesses in Canada. He'll provide the data to help businesses understand their consumption and the effects on the grid, as well as provide solutions that are built into one portal. Tanner is passionate about environmental consciousness, becoming multifaceted in terms of his skill, and raising the standard and quality of life worldwide. Thank you so much, Tanner, for taking time to come on this show. I will say you are a little bit of a different guest than we normally have. Normally, I focus on someone who is directly working in the food and beverage industry, but your role is also quite important, or I should say the organization that you work for is supporting our industry. So that's why I wanted you to come on the show, share some new perspectives, and give us a whole new look at the energy sector, because I never thought about it, but it's arguably quite important for these roles. So thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I'm going to let you talk about it a little bit more because you can explain who you are better than I can. Would you be able to tell me more about Edgecom Energy and what your role is there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Tanner Behrend. I'm the Manager of Funding and Expansion at Edgecom Energy. We're an energy management company. We're based in Toronto. We're really focused on delivering insights in terms of what's happening on the grid. So looking at things like price predictions, price forecasts, peak predictions, emissions forecasting, and then we're combining that with really granular information on what's happening within a customer's facility. So we're trying to provide them visibility into things like how they're consuming electricity, water, natural gas on not only a main level, so looking at kind of their operations as a whole, but then also getting into the more nitty gritty, looking at a process by process or machine by machine basis, and then providing all that all back to them in a very clear and cohesive way. So a lot of that comes down to, simplifying energy management, providing the benefits of an energy manager at a fraction of the cost, and breaking down those barriers that have really prevented a lot of facilities from participating in effective energy management in the past. And then kind of how my role plays into that, I manage all of our government-funded R&D, and then all of our efforts to get into new places. So we recently been into Alberta, and next up we're looking at the States. But that's kind of that's the short and sweet on me and Edgecom Energy.
Well, congratulations to getting in Alberta. And I can imagine the United States is a whole uncharted territory. But in terms of what you're doing, I think that's really interesting because I don't know, I would think that companies would already have access to this type of information. Like when you say it so simply, what you're doing, it sounds like, well, obviously they would already have that, but I guess that's just not the case.
Yeah, so you see in certain industries, and especially once you get to those facilities and companies that are multinational, huge, employing kind of, tens of thousands of employees, they do have a lot of these systems in place, and they are able to actively go out and source and afford some of those more traditional energy management solutions that are giving them access to the information. So I think if you're looking at the industry as a whole, there absolutely are some of those more sophisticated players that are kind of on the right track already. But especially when you're looking at the less sophisticated, the smaller side of things, when you're looking at plants that only have 100 employees, they're not going to have someone who's specifically focused on their energy spend. And I think that's especially true when you're looking at manufacturing and the different subsets within manufacturing. So as you start looking at agriculture, as you start looking at kind of the food processing supply chain, you do have a lot of whether they're mom and pop operations or kind of very bespoke, very specialized facilities that are, again, on the smaller side of things, they're entirely out of their depth a lot of the time when it comes to actually looking at how their operations are, A, consuming different inputs, B, how that actually affects their bottom line and how profitable they are as a business, and then but also C, how their operations and the operations of their supply chain affect the environment as a whole. So I think across those three categories, there's a lot of educating that needs to be done, and there's a lot of understanding that's lacking, especially when you're looking at those less sophisticated facilities within the ag and food supply chains.
Oh, okay. Well, let's dive a little bit more into that education piece. And again, because obviously we're agriculture slash food industry based, so food manufacturing. I mean, without getting into specifics of a particular organization or such, would you be able to provide an example of some type of facility that you've been able to help, and like what is more of those nitty gritty metrics that you're helping and assisting them with?
Yeah, so we, again, without naming any names, we work with a few different greenhouses, and I think they're a really good example on how a less sophisticated industry. I know, like, if you're looking at agriculture as a whole, greenhouses are probably on the more sophisticated end of things, but still,
Mm-hmm.
What is their core competency as a business? It's not going to be understanding how much electricity this row of lights is consuming, or understanding on a kind of greenhouse bay by bay level how much is being spent on heating. Like, it's kind of unfair of them to really expect that and have that expertise. So pretty much what we've done is we've come in, we have a plug and play solution. It's really easy on the installation and the utilization side of things. But what we've done is we've installed the solution. We've started giving them the visibility, started giving them the insights on how they can be better managing their energy, water, and natural gas spend. But I think the beauty of that, and really why I wanted to bring up this greenhouse application specifically, is that we started with them when they were, under an acre of greenhouse space. Like, they're an absolutely tiny little facility. They're really just very, very much early days in terms of their growth as a company. But if you're looking year after year, they've continued to expand. They've continued to build up more greenhouses, acquire more greenhouses. Now I think if you had to put a number on it, they've expanded their operations 25x. So they have an absolutely massive greenhouse facility now. But I think the beauty of our system is that we've been able to grow with them over time, give them more insights into, okay, as you're expanding out and as you're increasing the amount of coverage that you have in terms of the different crops, the different products that you're looking at, how is that impacting your bill? Is it entirely linear in terms of that relationship between the acreage that you're covering and what you're spending on your water, your heating, your lighting? Or are there different, or are you seeing that you're straying away from that baseline that's been set, especially as you're looking at, okay, we now have facilities across three, distinct generations. Let's make sure that the efficiency across these operations is maintaining at that level that we're looking at. And I think there's a lot of interesting cases, especially when you're looking at agriculture, which in the grand scheme of things is a very low margin business. A 25% savings on your electricity for a greenhouse is a lot more impactful than if you're trying to apply the exact same savings to a tire manufacturer. Their margins are higher. They can take a little bit more of that volatility. And I think that really a lot of that pulls into the trends that are affecting agriculture and affecting industries as a whole, whether you're looking at, volatile energy prices on the electricity or the natural gas side of things, recessionary fears, which is affecting everyone. I think we're getting to a point in time where it really doesn't matter what your facility is doing. You have to have at least a basic understanding of the energy that's being consumed and how you're going to be managing those spends if you have any hope of remaining competitive kind of as we move into the future.
Maybe I missed it, or maybe I just need some better clarification, because I know that you're not coming in and you're not putting in a new manufacturing line that's more efficient. You're helping to manage the energy. And I guess I'm having a little disconnect understanding how does a facility actually manage their energy if they need to run a production line like 24/7? Like, what could they manage per se?
Yes, there's a lot of different things. One, just shifting slightly when you're consuming energy. So even if you're running 24/7, there are going to be some different operations that you can switch, because even if it's a continuous flow, there's not going to be an entirely perfect push through a product through all of your lines at the same time. So one of the things that we do is when you're looking at kind of the price and peak side of things, we can actually let these customers know, okay, right now your consumption is peaking at 12:30, let's say. If you could move that back by an hour and a half, you would save X amount of dollars and at the same time X amount of emissions, because you're missing out on those periods when the grid is under the most stress. So that's one example there. With the visibility that we're providing, especially when you're looking across an entire manufacturing and the entire process that they're undergoing, we can start providing information on okay, this machine is consuming, or sorry, this machine line is consuming the most amount of your energy. This is really where you should start spending some of your capital and actually working towards getting a more efficient piece of machinery there. Once you've actually done that installation, we can then validate the manufacturer that you bought let's call it an extruder or whatever large piece of machinery you're getting. They promised a 13% consumption reduction. Let's make sure that you're actually getting that 13%. You're not getting 11. You're not being sold short. So there's a bunch of different kind of ways that we can step in. And again, data does tend to be the foundation to all of it, is that we're giving you the data to make better decisions faster. Same thing applies that if we're monitoring a piece of equipment, we're noticing that based on the vibration and temperatures that we're recording, this machine is going to need maintenance soon. So we can give you more information, more insights kind of ahead of time so that you have, whether it's, you're ordering pieces, whether you have those pieces, the order's already placed, so you can make that repair as soon as possible, or that, hey, this machine is the entire thing. It's going to be done within the next 3 weeks. You can get moving on that quicker and make sure that you're making those repairs before it affects kind of your business as a whole, so that that inconvenience is minimized and the downtime of your entire plant is reduced as much as possible. So long story short, there's a few different ways that we play into there, but I think a lot of it is enabling those customers to have the data that they wouldn't otherwise have access to, and then help guiding them through some of those decisions that they're making on an energy front to, again, get a better understanding of how their facility is actually working on the energy, water, and natural gas side of things.
That's really interesting. I mean, intuitively, well, not intuitively, but I know in Ontario, I think many people are aware that there's off-peak hours, on-peak hours, and mid-peak hours, where if you run your washing machine during this period, it's cheaper because it's an off-peak hour. And I guess that, goes on a big scale in terms of the manufacturing facilities. But, it's easy to think of, energy consumption on the other hand as like black and white, on or off. But I never thought about the power grid and how having a power grid work harder would be, less sustainable. Or even just what you mentioned, I find that really interesting about the maintenance, that, it's kind of a hidden, so to say, not seen way of knowing that the equipment's not working, but there's something like a numerical, tangible thing that you can account for, which that would be really beneficial for manufacturing facilities.
Yeah, and especially when you're looking at the smaller end of things, you're not going to have someone on your shop floor, or sorry, you might not have someone on your shop floor who's, an absolute master when it comes to every single piece of machinery that you have installed. So for them, it's not only saving them, the headache of, oh, my machines, or one of our key machines is broken, we're shutting everything down for the week while we try and figure out what's wrong. But it's also giving them insights on something that they wouldn't even be looking for in the first place. So I think there is kind of a streamlining and an ease of use that we're providing across multiple facets there. That I think, well, and just from the feedback that we're getting, it is especially impactful for those smaller plants who, again, wouldn't have access to this. So yes, it's just avoiding a headache, but there's absolutely monetary implications across the facility that are directly tied into your ability to effectively and efficiently monitor what's happening across your plant.
And that's, again, good for smaller manufacturers where, like you said, if they don't have a large team, for example, or like a large mechanics team, and you're coming in and assisting them from the outside, they don't necessarily have to hire a new worker, but at the same time, it gives them more information that can really help them plan without necessarily having a specialist there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we're trying to do, is give them those capabilities without having to make an investment into a person or into a system that would be a lot more expensive. And at the end of the day, they might not even require that at the end of the day. It might be, over-engineered if we're looking at a system side of thing, or you might only need, 25 out of that mechanics 40 hours a week, but you're paying for the full 40. So there's a lot of kind of sizing issues that we tend to see with a lot of these smaller facilities, that they need 40% of what a more complete solution is offering, but they just can't justify that from kind of a capital point of view. Again, with those limited budgets, especially in agriculture, you are kind of limited on the options that you have and the decisions that you're able to make. But again, I feel like these are all kind of issues that aren't talked about enough, because agriculture has its own kind of more pressing whether, you're looking at soil degradation, climate change, even like worker shortages.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of more pressing issues that are, again, closer to home when it comes to agriculture. So the energy, water, natural gas side of the coin tends to be forgotten.
Well, I mean, again, it is understandable with the respect, but I do actually want to shift the conversation back to focusing on you as like your professional career and such, because I find it very interesting that from what I know that you're an engineer. I wanted to know, like, how did you get to this position? Like, I find it really interesting that you're not out there designing on the production floor engineering processes. So like, how did you get into this role at Edgecom?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I graduated in 2021 from a program at Western University called Green Process Engineering, which is a big fancy name for chemical engineering with a little bit of sustainability topics touched on there. So
Mm-hmm.
I kind of, if we're looking at how I progressed through, grade school, high school, was always, oh, you're good at science and math, you should probably be an engineer. So I was kind of shoved down that path from a very early age. But then I think as I kind of got more exposed to different topics in the world and in the workplace, the climate, the sustainability, and kind of the green chemistry side of things really became more and more interesting. So the ability to kind of tailor the things that I was good at on the chemical, on the science and math side of things, and pair that very directly with something that was climate focused, because I knew that's something that I am passionate about. So the more ways I could tie that in, the better. Kind of there were good synergies and good overlaps with the program that Western was offering. So I finished that. I joined Edgecom Energy in the summer of 2021 as an energy policy analyst, pretty much a fancy title for reading through market manuals and highly technical information that really needed to be distilled down into something that you can actually quickly understand without having to read a 500-page manual. So that was good. And again, connecting different skills and interests that I had. Again, I feel like a lot of the engineering side of things is how do you collaborate with different groups of people? How do you take those technical concepts and distill them down into something that someone can understand very easily? Obviously, there's some math and some different implications on the grid and the energy policy side of things that were always helpful. And then I think looking at kind of the greater theme of climate change, there's infinite connections on how the engineering side of things has been connected into, especially being kind of at the interface between energy, climate, and industry. I feel like that's kind of a perfect spot to be able to touch on different topics that I was interested in and actually have the background skills that were transferable into those different areas. That's how I got my start. And then it's just kind of been moving along through the company from there, finding what different areas I was specifically interested in and was better at. So presentation skills, communication skills, collaborating with other people was something that became more and more apparent. And I think there was kind of an interesting gap between what that presentation, group work, and collaboration look like at a kind of a university level and how that actually expresses itself in the professional world. And I think it's, to a certain degree, the professional aspect of it, you're not given an honest exposure to it with the ways that work is really structured in the university setting. So I think, something that we can get into deeper if that's where we want to take the conversation. But long story short, engineering and personal interest really drove me into something that I was looking for something that I could have a greater impact on the climate side of things, and this was really an opportunity that checked a lot of boxes for me.
Oh, that's wonderful. And one thing that did come to mind is, would you mind sharing with me why you decided to go into something like policy, or you started as a policy analyst? Because a lot of maybe individuals who come out, I know you mentioned, pardon me, I know that you mentioned, of course, climate is very important to you and that intersection of all those different topics. But inherently, when you were working on policy and going through all these, like, that doesn't sound like something that someone who just completed their engineering degree would necessarily jump at. Would you mind maybe explaining how you decided that was the opportunity that you wanted to take rather than waiting for a more direct engineering role, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, that does make sense. I think part of it was on the policy side of things. A lot of it comes down to research, and I think directly coming out of academia and the engineering side of things you're doing some form of research every single day. So I think there was a direct crossover between what that engineering specific research looked like on a university scale and how that would directly be applied to um, the energy policy side of things. I think the climate tie-in, and in terms of how I could actually have a relatively quick impact. I think a lot of the changes, obviously, and a lot of the larger movement that happens across industries and across countries as a whole is obviously directly dictated by government outlooks, and the tangible part of that is policy. So I feel like getting a better understanding of how that policy is applied and how different industries are going to be affected by that policy really does help you be on the front lines of actually creating change in a tangible way. So I could have waited around and I could have gone for more like a project engineer role where I could have been a cog in a system, but I felt like getting really into the driving forces behind what was creating that change on the policy side of things, and whether or not there was the opportunity to directly dictate changes that were happening to that policy, that was kind of up in the air at that point. But I think there was a direct path to creating impact that I saw when I saw the job posting at the time. So along with the connections of direct ability and the actual crossover between what skills would be required, I think there was I did see that path at the time into actually having an impact, as opposed to just saying, oh yeah, I'm part of X, Y, and Z industry that has a sustainable outlook. There's a tangible sustainable benefit. I could actually validate and prove out that impact that I was having on a day-to-day basis.
Well, that's really cool. And okay, so that makes a little bit more sense about why you decided to go into that avenue, because I think a lot of people who want to go and deal with climate issues and such, even things with product development and such, of course you know that you're directly making an impact, but it's still not tangible, like you said. Like, I feel what you're doing now, I mean, you have the data to really back up what you're doing, and I could imagine that's even in itself a motivation thing to just keep going at this role and getting better. I know that you've moved on, that you're not doing the policy directly, but working within this organization.
Yeah, and I think it ties back to, there's a corny little tagline that I think I put on my LinkedIn, but it's like expanding the opportunities for cost savings and emission reductions across North America, which is, yes, it does come off as kind of corny, but it is real in a lot of ways, because what we're doing is we're giving that information and we're providing those systems to customers to help them decarbonize, help them become more energy efficient, which does have direct impacts that we're actually helping quantify for those customers that play into kind of the larger topics of decarbonization, moving away from fossil fuels and climate change as a whole. So there is a lot of immediate validation on being on the front lines of how that's actually demonstrated and how that's actually put in place. So I feel like those are also points that are very very valuable on a personal level, that does tie into making a difference on a larger scale.
Well, thinking about that from the other flip of the coin, a lot of individuals who aren't working directly, like in the energy sector, they are the ones working at the agricultural, and they're working at the food production companies. And, I think naturally a lot of students that I talk to, they want to go into product development. And there's always that focus, I find, on focusing on the ingredients rather than the processing, because, this could be a whole side argument. I feel like so much of the industry is more focused on the ingredients and like doing basic processes rather than actually working on the processes themselves. And I wanted to maybe ask from your perspective, I think that there's a lot of focus on creating new food products, but not the food processing. And maybe a student or someone who's new to their career, maybe in product development, for example, they want to start thinking about that side of the industry, like thinking about how to make the company more efficient from like an energy perspective. Like, what would you suggest for them who maybe knows nothing about this field to start to learn about this topic, start to think about how energy really plays a role in our food production, and applying those principles to when they're creating new products?
I think a lot of it, especially as you're looking from someone who's starting from zero, is actually just ingraining yourself in the different ways that energy directly ties into a product that you're trying to develop or sell. because obviously, there's always going to be benefits. And I think a lot of times, even across industries, you're always looking at from a product point of view, this new tomato strand, this new tomato breed is, 15% more, brighter color, like larger size, it's juicier, all that kind of stuff. But I think
Mhm.
there's different tie-ins, and I think from if you're looking at kind of a personal point of view, you want to make sure that you're considering all facets, and one of those is definitely okay from a water point of view. And I think especially when you're looking at agriculture, that's a very direct tie. And it's like, yes, you could have benefits of X, Y, and Z, but what is this doing on a waterfront? If you're growing this in an indoor setting, how does that actually affect? Um, how do the changes to the product and changes to the genome that you're making directly impact how much light this needs, the hours of light, the intensity of that light, which again has direct tie-ins onto the energy side of things. I think a lot of it just comes down to you want to make sure that you're considering all the aspects, that you're not really just limiting it to some of those more core competencies, but you're at least, even if you're not a subject matter expert on the energy impacts of what this new process or what this new product is doing, you're still being considerate and at least raising the question of, hey, but what is this actually going to do to our energy consumption? I think even if you're just opening that discussion and making it so that the rest of the team and the rest of the business that you're working with on some of these projects is aware of other implications, I think right there is you've already done a great service to not only the end product that you're able to produce, but also the ability and kind of open-mindedness of the team that you're working on to consider the bigger picture. So that's the starting point is always just going to be, ask a few questions, whether to yourself or whether it's to the team that you're working with, on how does this actually affect our energy, water, and natural gas. In some cases, it might not affect it whatsoever, but just being more cognizant of that kind of first avenue, and then on a larger scale, how does that connect to the impacts on the ecosystem, the impacts to carbon footprints, the ability of the soil to sequester different nutrients. I think there's a lot of different facets that could be considered, but the more questions you're asking on the front end to the rest of the team, to someone who might be a little bit more ingrained within the processes of what's happening within that facility, what's happening within that site, I think that's a really good starting point.
Well, that is good advice, because as you were speaking, my mind just started thinking, wow, there is just so many aspects and that to sustainability that can be focused on, and there's just so many there's so many things that can be focused on, and you might not have the expertise in those. And I think that really lends to the speaking that you have to start relying on other people in terms of like creating like a holistic team, that everyone has their strengths, that maybe one person's more focused on the energy consumption, the other person's more focused on the production side, on how that's going to fit in. Then you have the R&D thinking about, is it going to actually work? And then you come to the sales team or sourcing team to think about where to actually ethically source the same ingredients. Like, there's so many hidden things to how we just, our food system and how we eat, that you just don't consider, and you really need to depend on others as much as you want to go in on alone. Like, it really does seem like if we're going to come out of this climate issue that we have right now, that we need to use every tool at our disposal, but also lean on others as well.
Yeah, and like no one's going to be an expert in every single subject, and I think there's a little bit of a disservice that's been done when you're looking at that transition between direct school, direct in-class experience on, hey, you're working on this project, you're doing it entirely by yourself, or you're working with 3 or 4 other students who all have relatively similar skill sets. I think as soon as you're thrown out into the real world, so to speak, there's no expectation for you to be an entirely vertically siloed kind of one-man wrecking ball that can solve every problem that comes your way. There's always going to be someone out there who's either better at something than you, or just knows more than you. So I think the more open you are and the more able you are to at least have a basic understanding of kind of what those different concepts are. Again, you don't have to be a master on supply chain management when you're looking at agriculture, but if at least you have kind of that 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10 understanding, so that you can open up some conversations there and start to expand on your knowledge within those different kind of verticals and the different areas that are directly impacting the success of a business, the more kind of boxes you can check in that sense, the more able you are to really be that kind of that multifaceted employee that is able to be productive no matter what scenario you're being thrown into. So even if your studies were specifically focused on process improvement, if you're able to prove out that, yes, this is where my core competencies are, but I can also do X, Y, and Z. It means you can be a better team member, a better part of that system. And again, be able to benefit other facets that you might not have even had exposure to in the classroom. So I think there's a lot of it does just come back to being multifaceted in terms of the skills that you have and the opinions that you can bring to a table, but also being flexible and understanding the fact that you're not going to be able to answer every single question that comes your way, and there's always going to be someone at the table who does understand more than you.
Well, that's a good way to think about it as well, that you're not always going to be the smartest person in the room. And I hope that most people never think they really are. And I'm just thinking about, touched on an issue in terms of, in your undergraduate, we do a lot of team projects where you're surrounded by people with similar skill sets, or unfortunately you get placed into groups where not everyone wants to contribute the weight that they want. I think a lot of people know what that feels like. But coming into the workplace, and it's a totally different culture, I could imagine, for you transitioning from that undergraduate engineering to the real world with teamwork. And was there anything that you found difficult, or you had to learn that the workforce requires teamwork? Like, was there any skills or something that you've learned that you would want to share that has made that process a little bit easier for you working with others?
I think I can give an answer to that. I think the fact that I immediately went from an undergraduate degree directly into a startup environment meant that in a lot of senses I was thrown into the deep end. So the way that I was exposed to some of the kind of the different skills, the different abilities that you would need to have to be successful is a little different than what the average kind of development would probably look like. And I think right away it did come down to the ability to, wear different hats. So when I was looking at kind of what my first, 4 to 6 months looked like, yes, there was a lot of it that was directly research and simplification and analysis and kind of communication driven. And I think even, tagging on communication to the end of that is kind of an outlier. But there were other aspects of that on kind of, okay, now that we have all this research, and now that we really do have an understanding of how this specific program, how this tariff, how this regulation works, how do we then distill this information into something that is then shareable with the rest of the team? Okay, so that's already one side of it. That's an entirely, could be an entirely new skill. How do we then communicate that? And again, this ties into, the presentation, the ability to collaborate, the ability to even hold an engaging discussion to the point that you're not just, lecturing on about something. Is how do you have a kind of a two-way interface when you're sharing that information that is so important, especially when you're sharing information that is originally more technical than anyone else in the room would want to know, but still make that engaging to the point that they have, 75% of that, 75% of the understanding that's required to talk about that program knowledgeably to another coworker or to a customer. And then how are you even taking that information, then developing into, okay, we're going to make a product that's specifically based on this program. How do we now set out technical requirements for what's actually required to participate in this program? Then you take that even a level further. Now that we have this product that we have spec'd out, obviously you're going through a full kind of product life cycle and developing that, going through different levels of feedback and high fidelity, low fidelity designs. Now that we have this product that should be commercializable, how are we taking that messaging and changing it into something that's now marketable? So I think really the ability to be able to communicate with people of different technical abilities is kind of paramount there, especially when you're looking at a startup setting. But I think that's also directly applicable in any role where you're going to be interfacing with different teams. You might be in product, but you're going to have to talk to, HR. You're going to have to be working with accounting. You're going to have to be working with marketing and sales. I think there's really very few industries where being able to communicate with different groups of people and be able to tweak the way that you're talking about things to be appropriate in different kind of levels of conversation is incredibly important. And I think that directly ties into your ability to collaborate and be a successful team member. Now, how do you actually turn that into a skill? I think a lot of that it does come to just talking to different groups of people. Because obviously, if you're just going to be talking to, your buds, your students, friends that you have, it's all around that same kind of, there will be a little bit of a differentiation in terms of how their backgrounds have impacted their outlooks and their thoughts and processes on different things. But I think the more opportunities you can get out there to, even if it's just talking to a professor about whether it's a topic that's directly to school related or not, getting more insights and more practice with talking to people from different backgrounds, different levels of understanding on a variety of topics will directly impact your ability to succeed in multiple different ways that aren't even just job related when you actually do get to that workplace. Because again, like a lot of your day to day is, I have to fulfill X, Y, and Z tasks, but also a lot of that is, how do you interact with the rest of your community? How do you interact with the rest of your company? How do you interact with your coworkers? And I think the easiest way to, quote unquote, practice that is just put yourself out in more diverse situations, talking to people from different backgrounds, from different groups. So you can start to build out that collaboration mindset. That was a very long-winded answer, but that's if I was going to say one thing that was incredibly beneficial, it would be that.
I think that's really good advice. And I mean, I'm very fortunate. Strangely, I'm in a PhD program, so you would think that we don't really focus on it. But as part of my program, we have one course, we call it our seminar course, where essentially we get on Thursdays, we would have an outside professor talking to us about their research and just helps us gain a better understanding of the whole program. But then on Fridays, we have a seminar class where they would teach us how to communicate science. So we'd learn how to do an elevator pitch. We've learned how to do a presentation in front of class. We've learned how to explain. So my program personally, it's called molecular science, and it's made up of everyone and everything. So we have people studying cancer research to ecology to water waste systems. So very diverse for the same program. And we were told that we have to speak to our research to everyone. And it was just all these little things. And, you kind of groan because you have to do this every Friday. But I realize how grateful I am to my program now for doing that, because I realized when I speak to different types of people that I have to change my tone, and I kind of have to think about, okay, what is this person? Are they non-science? Are they mid-science? Are they very specialized in my topic? And it really activates another part of your brain. And that also I found when I went into the food industry, when I was working in QA, working with production staff, they would respond differently to how I would say something. You couldn't just say, well, scientifically it's this. Like, they care, but not in that sense. So you have to put it into different perspective. And it's something that I also very strongly believe in, is being able to communicate on different levels, because everyone has their own lived experiences and such. And different teams have different, although you all come together working for the same goal, if you go into an organization, you're going to have a different mindset than them, and you're going to have to communicate well. And the better you can communicate, the more convincing you are. And I think that, to speaking to what you said, going, maybe speaking to your professor, going out to networking events, like not to network to get a job, but just practicing talking to someone. So maybe don't go to, in your case, an engineering conference, maybe try to find something that has other types of folks that are of a different background, and just get used to talking to people. And as well, university puts you in this perspective that you're talking to people of your age group. And the real world is not full of 18 to 25-year-olds. It's all walks of life. So getting more opportunities to speak and just practicing and thinking about who you're talking to, it's never a bad thing.
Yeah, and I feel like that also communicating science, I really like actually how that comes out, because it is a very good way to summarize what the problem is there. And I think there's a ton of different bits that you hit on there in your answer, but just looking at kind of a lot of what happens on your communication front and the ability of you to kind of develop those skills outside of the classroom. It doesn't really matter what industry or what specific level of an organization you're coming into. Collaboration and the ability to communicate with different parties is always going to be impactful. I think it's the sooner you realize that, the sooner that you transition from, just like you said, you could go to a network event with your only goal is to, I'm going to secure an internship for the summer. That could be your goal. And if that's what you're doing, absolutely go for it. But I think there's another level that you can take that to of, even if it's on a conference front. There's so many conferences that give up free passes to students. So, you get yourself a free pass, go and make it a goal of yourself to talk to 10 different people at a booth. Like, it really doesn't matter what background they're coming from, and it doesn't really matter if that conversation at the end of the day led to something that's going to be, built on in the future. Just the fact that you're putting yourself out there, having that conversation, initiating a conversation, with someone who you otherwise wouldn't have been able to communicate with someone who comes from a different background, who has a different point of view, who has a different understanding on kind of what you're working on and where they're working on. And again, some of this does tie into confidence as well, which I think a lot of times as a student, there are very limited opportunities to actually develop your confidence, especially on a communication side of things. But you laid out some really good examples of how you can actually go out there and start practicing this in a way that is outside the classroom, is different from kind of what you're studying on a day-to-day basis, but also you're not having to go out there and spend $15,000 on some professional communication course, which might just be a waste of time at the end of the day. There are some very practical, low effort, low cost ways that you can start developing this, or even just put yourself in a situation that would make you uncomfortable, because at the end of the day, that's where you really start developing those new skills and start adding new capabilities, or at least uncovering different shortcomings or things that you do want to start working on.
Well, speaking more to the tangible, I know that you are someone who has been at a lot of, I guess you would say, trade shows and such. And just thinking if there was a student in the audience listening and they wanted to just practice just talking. If someone came up to a booth, like what would you recommend they? Again, the person's not looking for a job; they're just looking to better talk with other people and such that are outside of their industry. Like, how would you recommend that they approach you, or like what kind of things should they say?
There's a simple kind of saying. It's that people love to talk about themselves. So in a lot of those conversations, you really don't have to be saying anything that's too thought provoking. You can just ask them very simple, like, especially if you're looking at kind of an industrial or a trade show kind of things. Walk up to any booth and just ask them what they're doing. A lot of times that'll lead into a 5, 10, 15-minute conversation where the next question becomes immediately clear of, hey, I'm developing a product that does X, Y, and Z for this industry. You start getting into talking about themselves, and you can take that in two different ways, whether you want to talk about specifically their company or even them as a personal level. I think a lot of people are, especially when you're looking at the people who do show up and are manning the booths at some of these trade shows, they are incredibly sociable people who will love to talk about themselves. So the more questions you can start feeding out there, you really don't even have to do much talking yourself. So there is kind of a sense of feed out starter questions as simple as, what are you guys doing? Where are you based? What does what does a prime customer look like for you? Who really uses your product? Like there's a lot of very easy, very intuitive questions that are just part of kind of the average flow of a conversation. And I think if you're differentiating that from kind of a personal level, it's the business side question of what's your name, where are you from, what did you go to school for? It's very much just transferring that kind of level of question into a business sense. But yeah, and again, especially if you're at a trade show, those people are there to talk your ear off. So in the sense of actually practicing, those are the best people to be going up to and having a conversation with, because that's what they're there for at the end of the day.
That is a good point. I love how your answer is just simple, like simplicity. Sometimes you don't have to overthink things. Like just showing up is a good start. And like you said, I know I've met some people at trade shows, and there's businesses specifically choose these individuals to represent their company because they are the individuals who can speak well. And a lot of trade shows as well, they usually have a mixture of people where they have the more of the outgoing salesperson, and then they generally have as well like a technical person depending on the booth. I mean, depending on the product. But there's a good array of stuff, because I have to highly agree with you, because it's something that I used to do. Still nervous somehow going up to people and talking to them. Again, something I need to work on, but it definitely like boosts your confidence. And then at the end of the day, it's also low risk. I mean, unless you're going to a company that you wanted to work for your whole dream life, like many of these organizations, you might never see them again, but it also encourages you to it might expand your horizons because there's someone doing a really cool startup. I mean, I could imagine if I came up to you, I would have never known, and I would have come out going, hey, that's really cool. Like maybe I should consider something like that.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is actually, zooming out just slightly, because I think in the moment, yeah, you're going to be, I'm talking to an absolute stranger that could be, some circumstances 40 years older than me, infinitely more knowledgeable, in probably most aspects of life. So that I can absolutely see how that could be daunting. But I think if you can zoom out, take a step back, and actually look at, hey, what is the potential downside of this conversation? Next to nothing. Like, what's the worst thing? They say no.
True.
And I think a lot of it is that, you're 19, 18, 19, 20. You're very young in the grand scheme of things. You don't have that kind of that worldly exposure. So a lot of those interactions on your end might seem like, especially if this is the first person I've talked to at a conference, that absolutely can be scary. But I think if you're looking at it from their point of view, you're just another conversation that's coming up to them. It's really very nonchalant. And I think there's obviously going to be a transition that happens between kind of, your first 2, 3, 4, 5 conversations and your 400th. But I think really just zooming out and realizing that in the grand scheme of things, this absolutely could be incredibly impactful, but the upside there is almost entirely positive. And the worst thing I could say is, no, I don't really want to talk to you right now. And that's really not a bad outcome at the end of the day.
I was just gonna say too, like it's not a bad outcome in the sense that even if they say no, it also gets you accustomed to people being busy or
Mhm.
not being able to talk to you, and that's just something that's happened. I've had it come up to me, and in the moment I felt kind of bad, and then I realized after I was like, oh, they're just busy, but it just kind of got you a little more used to that. I'd like to think that most people are not out to get you. They're just busy, and they are at a trade show, for example, to find a new customer, client, and such. And maybe they just don't have time with the students does not mean anything personal. It's just
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, separating that decision from anything personal, I think, is not only good for your mental state, but also just more accurate and more realistic in terms of how the world actually works. Is that most people don't have it out for you.
yeah, exactly. And as well, with these interactions, because one thing with school is that you get very trained, bad grades. So much is on the line for like your academic worth and those types of things, which there's a place in that, which I get. But at the end of the day, when you come into the real world, a lot of the times, like your life is not ending because of a bad conversation. It's just you move on and you find your next opportunity. And the more that you can expose yourself to that, it's uncomfortable, and honestly it sucks, but it's just how things are.
And I think there's a few, like, at the end of the day, a decision, a project, honestly, and any decision that you're making on a day-to-day basis, whether good or bad, is just a data point at the end of the day. So, if you're thinking about it in that sense, is that especially when you're looking at, again, that distinction between the academic sense of, oh my God, I only got a 96. I can't believe I got 4% wrong. I think that's one thing that is, in a lot of senses, does prepare you horribly for business, especially when you're looking at startups where the mentality is a lot closer to the, every time you fail, every time something goes wrong, that's just a learning opportunity. So there's a saying, it's, fail fast and often, because you do want to make sure that if there is a learning opportunity that or a bad decision that was made, you're making it quickly and you're immediately correcting that and learning from it, as opposed to dragging on that mistake for 6, 7, 8 months. So I think that obviously gets applied to different levels, but there's a bunch of different sayings there that, yes, they do sound corny when they're taken kind of out of context, but when you're actually thinking about it, and especially once you get into kind of the professional side of things, they are readily applicable to innumerable different opportunities and different settings that you could find yourself in.
Well, speaking to that, to your current role and such, we've been talking about in the context of students and such. And when it comes to maybe you've had opportunities in your career that they didn't really go the way they expected, maybe a client didn't work out and such, like how do you move on from that? And you say like take it as a data point. Do you write about the experience? Do you kind of just keep it in the back of your mind? Like, how do you take a negative situation and apply it to make your next client visit better, for example?
Yeah, so I think there's a bunch of different levels to that. I think a lot of it is most readily applicable to different opportunities that we've looked at. Like I've sunk dozens of hours into programs. I'm thinking more on kind of the funding side of things, where I put together 30-page applications for something that at the end of the day wasn't really a perfect fit. So I think looking back on that, one, there's information that even in just that application that I was typing out is going to be valuable in terms of changing kind of the direct value proposition for a different setting, which can be directly applied to somewhere else. So I think in that sense, looking back on that opportunity, not from a negative point of view, but looking back at it in terms of, okay, it might not have been the best opportunity, but it changed our perspective on this, and this. We've now outlined a new vertical or a new value proposition that could be potentially more impactful in future conversations or future applications that we're going forward with. Obviously, even just physically keeping that work somewhere as something that you can go back to, pull out some of that information in a future application, or even just look back on it from kind of a personal point of view and see over time how the way that questions are being answered have changed. I think especially when you're looking at kind of that startup setting where, in a span of 6 months, a product can change drastically. So as you, if you kind of have these, it's kind of like a diary page at the end of the day. It's like or a snapshot in terms of what a product was being described at that time. I think even then, like that is a value point. That's something that you can show that progression on how we've really gotten a better understanding of the industry, the problem, and the problem that we're looking to solve, and the product that we've developed to solve that problem. I think there's incredible value in just even keeping a log of that, so you have a point to refer back to. And I think especially when you're looking at, I don't know, like a different application of that is, you had a meeting with someone that didn't go well. Obviously, I think a big thing is, and one thing that school actually does a really good job preparing you for, is just take notes on everything you do, because you're not going to be able to remember everything. So like every single meeting I have, I'll pull up an Apple note, or I'll just start scribbling something on paper, but just write each and everything that comes to mind. And after that meeting, whether positive or negative, just whether it's asking yourself questions at the end of it, whether it's taking down kind of different higher level insights on, I asked them these questions, I took the conversation this way, and this was kind of the outcome. Again, like calling it a data point, one, helps remove that personal aspect from it of, hey, I had a call with a customer and they just flat out said no, and helps you really look at it from a more analytical point of view of how did the way the conversation was structured, the points that I talked about, the responses they gave, really, how did those things come lead to the conversation going to where it did. So I think, again, removing that personal aspect really does help take a step back and actually look at it from an analytical point of view. So those are, I think that can also be applied larger to, if you made a poor decision, kind of backtracking and seeing, okay, were we fed the wrong piece of information? Was I looking at the wrong thing? Did we follow the wrong process? And I think backtracking and seeing where that went wrong. And then for next time, what are those pitfalls that we can avoid? What are things that we should be more mindful of? And how can we ensure kind of a successful outcome next time around?
Well, I'm going to leave it there. That's some great advice, and I think I personally use it. I think it's great. But we are coming to the end of our time, so I do want to make sure that before I let you go, there's 2 questions that I want to ask you. And I just want to quickly get some advice from you. If you could give any life advice to students that are in their last year of university or college, what would you give them?
I think apply for any job that even if it is only 10% of it is interesting to you, I think that there's no harm in applying for that. That's one thing that as I was looking for jobs, the more open you can be, you never know what different thing you can be exposed to that might actually catch your interest. And especially I think when you're looking at the limited perspective and the limited opportunities that you're really exposed to from a traditional academic point of view, I think you are done a lot of disservice if you're just focused on kind of your past knowledge for those jobs that you're applying for. So I think being open in that sense, and even if a job's like, hey, I only like 15% of what this role entails, apply and get to an interview, because that's just more information that you can feed back into your decisions down the line. And again, what's the worst thing that happens there? You don't hear back from them. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to explore different avenues, and I would encourage any student to do that in any way they can.
Well, that's great advice, Tanner, and I definitely have to agree with you on that one. And the last question I have to ask you before I let you go is, where can people find you?
So easiest way is you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Tanner Behrand at Edgecom Energy on LinkedIn. Nice and unique name, so you won't have too much trouble finding me there. But otherwise, you might bump into me wandering around Toronto, but LinkedIn's probably the best place to go.
Amazing. I'll make sure to link that in the show notes for anyone who's looking for that. But once again, thank you, Tanner, for coming on the show, really explaining about a new idea that I hadn't really given much thought about in terms of how important it is to our agricultural, just our whole lives in general, but more specifically, obviously, to the food industry and the agricultural industry. So thank you for sharing that, and as well sharing some of your career advice. I hope that students really get a lot out of it. I know I think much of what you said was great for students to take in, and I hope that it really changes their perspectives.
Yeah, no, happy to be involved, and hope I could provide some different insights. And if even one person found it interesting, that's a win in my books. So thanks for the opportunity, and absolutely an honor to be a part of it.
Thank you so much for listening to episode 70 of the Food Grads podcast. All notes to this podcast can be found by clicking on the Student and Grads tab on the Food Grads website. There, you can find any notes to past or future episodes. Is there someone you would like us to interview on the show? Perhaps yourself. Or maybe there's a certain career path you would like us to explore. Then let us know. You can email me at veronica.hislop, hislop, @foodgrads.com, or reach out on any of our social media platforms. Thank you everyone who stayed to the end of this podcast episode. I know that Tanner isn't directly working in the food and beverage industry, but he works in an adjacent industry that is arguably just as important to the role. I know that many of you listening would agree that the food industry has had a spotlight recently shined on it regarding its environmental impacts. Very understandably so, because it is something that every person can directly relate to. We all eat food. Though I think energy isn't being talked about as much as I would have expected. We talk a lot about it from the carbon perspective about how food affects it, but I feel as though translating that to the energy side isn't really happening as much. Maybe I'm just not hearing the right news, but that's just something that I'm perceiving. I do think it is easy, though, to get caught up in food from the materials perspective, thinking about ingredient functionality when it comes to product development or innovation in the sense of like automation and such, and how to create these manufacturing lines. And maybe I'm just not speaking to production people, but again, from the outsider's perspective, I feel we're not talking as much about energy, like pure usage of energy. So, I mean, manufacturing is an inherently energy intensive process, so I'm maybe a little surprised that I'm thinking this way, but anyways, Tanner has really opened my eyes with this episode on the topic, and he just speaks so well. Like, wow. I was really impressed throughout the episode when I was asking him questions, and he was just very much able to answer them and articulate so well. But with a lot of the things he was talking about, honestly, energy is still a little bit above me. Maybe because, again, coming from my food perspective. But I think I'll definitely have to do more research, and I encourage you as well, too. Though, again, I love the idea that Tanner was coming from, the idea that you should use the tools that are at your disposal, and just even shifting how you use your energy usage, almost like what you do at home if you're trying to catch the off-peak and on-peak hours. It's a good way to start. Again, I always love the idea of working with what you have. Reduction is always the first key. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce is the first one, and that's for a reason. If you reduce your energy usage, then you are ultimately helping the environment. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Thank you everyone so much for listening, and I will see you next time.